Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative of Cleveland, we welcome you and thank you for joining us for our first READI Community Engagement Series talk titled Equity in Engagement, How to Engage Community Members as Researchers. This topic was born from conversations about how to make the process easier for all stakeholders involved as we move toward more inclusive, diverse, accessible, and equitable research study questions, experiences, results, and implementation. Before we begin, we'd like to share a bit about the CTSC. The Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative, or CTSC, of Cleveland is a collaborative among Case Western Reserve University and its affiliated hospital systems, the Cleveland Clinic, Metro Health, University Hospitals, and the Louis Stokes Veterans Administration Medical Center. We aspire to be a catalyst for high-quality clinical and translational research, both locally and nationally, by changing the culture and environment of biomedical research, sharing resources and expertise, and streamlining the research process to move translational research from bench to bedside and to the community. Very excited about today's program, and here's what you can expect. We'll do some introductions for this all-star research team, and following those introductions, you'll hear a presentation from the research team, and then we'll begin Q&A. So let's meet the team. Becca Vaz is a passionate advocate for systems and policies that yield better outcomes for children and families. Her experiences as a U.S. Marine, military spouse, parent, public administrator, and volunteer yield a unique perspective on service and the importance of community. Becca holds a Master of Public Administration degree from UNC Chapel Hill and a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy. She currently serves as a manager for the UH Rainbow Center for Child Health and Policy, where she is surrounded by an amazing team of public health researchers. Becca and her husband Dave are Ohio boomerangs who returned in 2018 and are raising 4 incredible, energetic children. Her motto is, "I'll never be bored." Dr. Ava Johnson is a Cleveland native. She obtained her medical degree from Case Western Reserve University and completed her residency at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital. Dr. Johnson works in the Division of General Academic Pediatrics at Rainbow and has a special interest in nutrition, pediatric mental health, and health equity. Her current research involves Black fathers' access to healthcare. Dr. Johnson is assistant professor of pediatrics at Case Western Reserve University. She also serves as a regional medical director for the Rainbow Primary Care Institute, through which she is involved with formulation of Rainbow's outpatient clinical practice guidelines. Dr. Johnson is board certified in pediatrics and is a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Mikal Brown is the regional director of Passages Connecting Fathers and Families, a social service organization in Northeast Ohio that provides programming and services to fathers and families in the Northeast Ohio area. Mikal has been with the organization for 6 years and has served in many roles prior to becoming regional director. Previously, Mikal worked in education as well as mental health. Mikal has a master's degree in communication research from Cleveland State University and currently resides in Cleveland, Ohio. Steve Kilpack is the executive director of the Community Endeavors Foundation and the Healthy Fathering Collaborative of Greater Cleveland, and has been in these positions since 2001. The primary mission of both organizations is to develop and promote social and health services over the lifespan of fatherhood, beginning with young men who are not yet fathers through pregnancy, childbirth, early childhood, the school years, and into grandfathers and adult male mentors. Steve is also a founding board member of the Ohio Practitioners Network for Fathers and Families, a member of the Cuyahoga County Adams Board, a former community representative to the National Children's Study, and a former member of the Ohio Commission on Fatherhood. Demetrius Stiles is a clinical social worker. He currently works at the VA hospital. He attended Bowling Green State University for undergrad and Case for his master's program, focusing on adult mental health. Demetrius' social work background includes working in a youth group home, UH Child and Adolescent Inpatient Psychiatric, UH's Pediatric Practice, and Metro Health Trauma Recovery Center. His experience working in pediatrics helped him build connections with community partners and also increased his interest in healthcare disparities and issues. And our final team member is Lashina Brooks. She serves as a research assistant in the UH Center for Child Health and Policy, and she will kick off the presentation by sharing how she was integral in the success of this study.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. My name is Lashina Brooks. I am a research assistant for Rainbow Baby Center for Child and Policy. That is a really huge school. But yeah, so my responsibilities for the Fathers Project was recruiting the fathers and considering the fathers when they came in for their child's appointments. I created the READI database, so that held the participants' demographics and information, storage for audio and transcripts, gift card information, etc. Right? So my main responsibilities for CCHP is very broad. Our hands are in so many things, but basically the main thing is the same: recruiting, consenting participants, creating READI databases, going to community events, engaging in conversations with community members, community leaders, community partners. So many things, but that's basically the gist of CCHP, right? Okay. So let's continue on. So I would say some challenges that arose during the process and during the Fathers Project was definitely the main challenge was the lack of consistency and dads actually showing up to the interviews, right? So during the recruitment process and consenting process, they seemed very engaged, ready to go, ready to do the interview. But when it came to like the actual date, a lot of fathers did not show up. So I would say that was our main challenge during this process. I would say our second main challenge was definitely broadening our demographics of the fathers. So far, the interviews that we have conducted have only been fathers who are insured or who are in a higher tax bracket, right? So our main goal was to just broaden our horizon and demographics, but so far it has been kind of limited to a certain demographic of fathers. So I would say those were, our two main challenges throughout the process so far. So basically how we navigated through those challenges and still are navigating through those challenges is continuing to speak to the fathers, continuing to call and reach out and trying our best to reschedule at inconvenience of the fathers. They said that, times kind of were inconvenient. So trying to make it as convenient for fathers as possible to conduct their interviews. So, whether that was changing our times or our end, maybe conducting some interviews over the weekend, so just trying to work with them as much as possible. And also meeting with our team, right? So engaging in conversations about strategies that we can use to increase our interviews and maybe collect data outside of the interviews from the dads in the midst of recruiting and consenting. So I would say those were how we navigating, those challenges so far. So I would say some growth opportunities that came along the way with this project, and also some opportunities for community researchers that maybe wanted to get involved in research or specifically with fathers. I would say after participating in this project and being on the research team, I believe first that we did a great job. So shout out to the team and all the efforts that they put in to the project, during the process and conducting the interviews. But I believe something that we learned would be involving the interviewers or the community researchers in the actual recruitment process, right? So this could help build a more solid trust foundation with the fathers and kind of make them more comfortable before actually conducting the interviews, being able to see who they'd be talking to and not having to kind of like avenue through different members of the team. So I would say that was definitely amazing that we learned during this process. And also limiting the gap between recruitment and interview dates. So dads are very busy, right? So kind of recruiting and then scheduling for an interview date that's maybe a week out was kind of like inconvenient for them, and definitely probably contributed to why dads weren't showing up as consistently to interviews. So kind of wrapping up here, so some key takeaways from my perspective overall was that we have to continue.
Maybe we could just pause this right now and we can have her finish this at the end, just because I think people might not know what she's maybe we could have her finish up her summary at the end, since we could tell a little bit more about our study and how we got to this point, what she's talking about.
All right. So
is that okay?
Kick off your presentation. Absolutely.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you. So thanks everybody for joining this call. I'm Ava Johnson. I'm the PI in this call, but really, even though as a PI, the whole team has been just working together just to make this a go. So the project, we're going to talk a little bit about this specific project about access of Black fathers to healthcare, but then sort of talk about how, again, the community researchers were a pivotal piece of this ongoing project and why that was so important for the success of this project. So just some general background. This research project is looking at Black fathers' access to healthcare, because we know that many Black fathers have poorer health outcomes from heart disease, mental health issues than white fathers. And I am a general pediatrician in our pediatric practice, the main residency one at Rainbow. We are in an urban practice with about 92% Black families, and noticing that many Black fathers come into care, but we often are not engaged in the care by providers because they're many times focused on the mother and the child. So really thinking about how do we make sure we engage fathers and then make sure that they know that their health is so important for the health of their children and their families. And so what can we do to make sure that they are connected to healthcare, sort of how this all came about by just seeing the number of fathers coming into care, but into care with their children, but not knowing how many are actually engaged in their own healthcare. So initially this grant went out to the Center for Health Disparities at Metro, and for that grant required a community partner to be involved, which is how I initially got paired up with Steve Kilpack, who has a lifelong passion for engaging fathers in all sorts of issues. And so that's how the initial partnership started, with a community partner and Steve's work in the community, and then sort of blossomed from that point on. So I don't know if I should, Steve, do you want to jump in a little bit about so your work with fathers and how that?
Sure, Ava, I'd just be happy to give a little background to my connection. So early in 2000s, a national study called the Child Wellbeing Study out of Princeton found that low-income unmarried dads were extremely well connected to the father or the mother of their child at the birth of the child, and often active at the birth. But we know that fathers are not engaged in maternal child health care. So this became a real interest of mine to work with healthcare settings to try to engage fathers throughout the perinatal period. And I was lucky to be involved with some research a few years ago with about breastfeeding in fathers with Lydia Furman, and this kind of triggered my connection to Rainbow. So along the way, I developed a real interest in what I call the idea of paternal perinatal care, where fathers would be connected with primary providers at the point of a pregnancy. And that's really where I connected with Ava. I had that interest in making sure they were connected with primary providers, and Ava had one from her perspective as well.
Awesome, thanks, Steve. So with our connection, we sort of had this study, built this study, looking at doing initial individual interviews and getting some basic data there. And then the second part of the study was to do focus groups with dads. And so those are the sort of the two aims, to look at the barriers that fathers see in their own healthcare access, but also community-wide access to healthcare, and also to understand how they think their health affects the health of their children and their families. And then really what their ideas were, what we can do better to broaden access to these for these fathers to healthcare. So that was our aims for this. And right now we are currently on aim 1, doing the individual interviews. And I think Sheena had some spoilers in there about some challenges we've had with getting connected to fathers, but we have been recruiting for fathers in the primary care practice where I work. And again, the big piece of this was really, how do we best make a research team that's going to really help fathers identify with this research project, make sure they feel connected to it, and which is sort of how we came to this topic of building the best research team to make sure this project is successful and we are able to connect well with dads that we're recruiting for this project. Again, it's all Black fathers we're recruiting that are present at the visit with their child, and again, doing individual interviews over Zoom, lasting like 15 to 30 minutes. Again, asking questions about their own healthcare access, but then just generally what they think we can do to improve access for fathers in general. And so that's sort of where we are, not right now, but we could talk a little bit more about how, why that's important. Again, thinking about we're recruiting these Black fathers, who are they going to feel most comfortable talking with for these interviews? Who are they going to feel most open with? And thinking that having another Black man would be probably the ideal for getting them engaged. And we know that unfortunately for many research teams, the CCHP doesn't have any Black males working on their team. And we know that it's hard to have somebody to find to do the research. And so really engaging our community partners, thankfully with Steve's connection and Demetrius has worked in our clinic before, really thinking through how we can make sure that we have a team that fathers identify with. So like, I don't know if Demetrius and Mikkel could just talk a little bit about their experience working on this team, and again, what they found about their involvement with. Demetrius, it looks like you're unmuted.
Yeah, I can start. Oh, I didn't mean to mute. But I guess for me, it was a hassle, if you will, to get the calls and get the interviews. However, when the interviews were being conducted, I can say that a lot of these dads had a lot to say, and it was it was important. We were able to engage with one another more than just the interview itself. You can kind of hear and tell them being more comfortable in the space of, hey, I see this in a clinic. I experienced this. Not that it's not to say anything is bad, but it was room for these dads to voice, kind of like what they think about healthcare, because it's something. I mean, I'm a relatively new dad. My oldest is 3, my youngest is 1, and I do remember going through this, and it's like, hey, I am kind of, like Steve said, like the paternal care, like I do have a PCP and whatnot, but you do kind of have these thoughts and whatnot, and that's not taken away from, of course, our moms, but you have these things that go on in your mind or whatnot. So I see the dads like, oh, hey, thanks for asking me that. Hey, I was thinking that when I was in the clinic, and they're sharing similar experiences. So they had no problems engaging when they were actually on the call. The hardest part is getting them to the call, but they're just, it was very, very great, especially as a Black man, to hear other Black men open up about their experience when it comes to healthcare and fatherhood.
Yeah, when I was approached about this project by Steve, gosh, a year ago or so, I was very interested, because that's something that's near and dear to me, is improving these health outcomes, and especially physical mental health outcomes. What I found in the interviews that I conducted was just like Demetrius, these guys were really open to talking about their experiences within the healthcare system. And it was just a weird, maybe an anecdote, but the guys that actually showed up overwhelmingly reported that they were very satisfied with their healthcare, and in turn, these people had employer-sponsored health insurance. So I think that's something interesting to look at. But it was nice to connect with the gentleman and talk about and just learn where do you get your information about health, and how engaged is the pediatrician when you're in there? Are they asking about your health and how you can be more engaged? And so I think it's giving these people a voice to say I deserve to be a part of this process with my child, and kind of a family health, improving family health. So I thought that was really interesting.
And speak a little bit about your experience, because I think that both of you have been involved in some research previously. Demetrius, I think he worked on the breastfeeding study that Steve talked about, and Mikkel, you did that in graduate school, some research. But again, I think not a huge amount of research experience, but something you have each had experiences on your own.
Yeah, the breastfeeding experience with doing the research with Lydia Furman, and also learning a lot about IUDs, interestingly. Talking to part of it was me talking to men about their experience or knowledge with breastfeeding and birth control, kind of like from their perspective of just like what they know, and it was enlightening to me. And again, these are questions for partners that can help just improve the quality of understanding of what's going on, because as a dad, you kind of, we're asking about birth spacing, we're asking about kind of like the dynamic in the household and whatnot. But there are things that when we ask fathers about, it's kind of like, oh, I don't know. It's like that's not something that like really crosses my mind. I mean, to be honest. So engaging with dads about like the breastfeeding knowledge, and also the I forgot what the correct term is, what we use for the IUD. But anyway, family planning. It's just something that, not that they weren't engaged, it's something that I guess they weren't asked enough about. So it just like, if we have one, this and that, but it's a lot of knowledge and information that came along with it. I remember giving them a little packet and I read through it. I was like, oh my, I didn't know this. Like I didn't know a lot of this stuff. And the men, I remember showing it off the men, and we were just like, man, this is like crazy about this research that came out and whatnot. And we were all in awe of it. So that was a good research experience. And I really appreciated, Lydia for doing a deep dive, and Steve, of course, for being a great community connection with that.
And so my research experience was back in 2008. I studied like communication mediums. So to put it into context, like we were studying people's engagement, watching a video on an iPod, if you remember those. And so fast forward to today, I'm still involved in research, but it's more on the data collection side. So all the programs I supervise are being studied for their outcomes. And so while I'm not on I'm not analyzing anything, I am responsible for like collecting appropriate data and making sure everything is clean, and to make sure that we're showing that what we're doing is working. So.
And how important do you think it was being Black men engaging with these fathers in this project? Again, I think that was very extremely intentional with this project. I don't know if you think that they would have gotten the same kind of answers from fathers without connecting that level, or?
To me, I think it depends. I think it does help, but I've been around Steve a lot, who's clearly a white guy. But I've spoke to Steve enough, and I know like when someone like Steve, even though he's a white guy, when you speak to him, you automatically know he gets it. Like he understands. I've spoke to Steve plenty of times, engaging with him. So yes, it does help to have a Black male, but it's also someone who's very engaged and in tune with the population they're speaking with. It's not, coming with all this jargon and all of the fluff and whatnot. It's coming straight to, excuse me for lack of a better term, coming to someone else as a man and really trying to talk through and engage and help in that. And I think that specific part helps, having genuine individuals that understand the plight of what you're going through personally.
Yeah, I think it is helpful too, but I agree with Demetrius in that, like, if someone understands like the problem and is really actively trying to like come up with a solution, I think people I think people's like radars know when somebody's being genuine. And so while I think it's an important aspect, I don't know. I think it is important that Demetrius and I were both Black men, but I don't think it should be like exclusive. I think if there's somebody like Steve Kilpack or somebody that again understands the barriers and the problems and is working to actively come up with solutions, I think that's just fine too.
Yeah. But the thing about it too is like, because we both know Steve, and you know, I would say, and that if Steve would, if I had to do an interview with Steve, I'd kind of be like, but when you listen to him talk, and that's just I guess part of being more kind of trained and engaging and understanding the population that you're working with, because yeah, maybe a Black man may tear down one initial barrier, kind of like that initial. However, it can be possible with someone who can interact well. And I think that's important because part of the problem is that kind of going on like a little social work thing, but the system itself overall, there's a lot of oppression, racism and whatnot. And when you do see certain populations as a Black person or a Black man, that person represents the institution. Like I told Dr. Johnson before, like she's an amazing pediatrician. Of course, I've worked with her, but to maybe a common person, she represents the institution and the reason why we're doing this research in the first place. Like she did nothing, but she represents University Hospital as the healthcare institution. So they may feel like this is just another doctor that's, that doesn't understand my plight or doesn't understand Black health or whatnot. So that's also important to kind of understand with research like this, is that we do have our biases, especially in our community, due to whatever reason, history or systematic racism or multitude of things.
Yeah, I just want to thanks to both of you guys for the compliments, but I just want to quickly affirm what Demetrius is saying. Ava and I, we represent white institutions, and I thought it was really important when we were designing this research to meet fathers where they are in the clinic. And they were being shown pictures of Demetrius and Mikal, and that helped immediately give them a sense, I think, that they were going to be speaking to someone like them. If they'd seen my photo, I don't think they'd want to talk to a bald white old man. So I
didn't want to say that, Steve, but yeah.
These little things to break down barriers are just so important. Yep. And I think it's really interesting, just that both of these guys pointed out that they haven't really connected with low-income Black men. And, we need to keep that in mind, that they didn't even have a chance to have healthcare until 2014 when Medicaid was expanded. And so this is a community of men that we're trying to reach that don't have very little experience with healthcare and a feeling like it's not available to them.
So Becca, I don't know if we can sort of talk through, because we very intentionally wanted to have men from the community like Mikal and Demetrius who were on our research team. But getting to that point was a hard path. And if it wasn't for Becca, we wouldn't be here talking like this, because it was months of barriers to getting community research involved in this project. And so I think we could go back to lessons learned after this, but I think Becca talking through the process of getting here, because again, we were very intentional about that, but we could have easily given up on it because there were many barriers to getting community researchers on the project and get engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to leave my share screen up, and I'm actually going to just cruise here to my next slide if I can. Oh, this is nice. I can't. There we go. Okay. I wanted everyone to see this. This is like my masterpiece. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet before, my name is Becca Boss, and it's my privilege to serve as the manager at the Center for Child Health and Policy. I say all the time, my biggest responsibility is to do things behind the scenes and then get the heck out of the way so that our awesome team of public health researchers can do their jobs. And this has been a really wonderful project. But one of the big hurdles we had to clear, first of all, was figuring out how we get our community researchers integrated into the team. And so that was part of my project, and it's something that I've wanted to do a better job of. We've brought in student researchers before, but we haven't really transitioned to this community researcher piece. And so what you're looking at right now, I would almost encourage you, rather than trying to read it, just kind of squint and think of it as a complex process. These were all of the steps that we had to go through in order to get Demetrius and Mikal set in our system so that they were able to engage with the study, that they were part of the IRB. I'm going to stop share now so nobody like goes cross-eyed. And what we recognized was that there were so many hurdles along the way that probably if there wasn't somebody who was keeping an eye on that process throughout and who was really committed to making it happen, that it's too easy to throw in the towel. It's too easy to say, this is for the birds. Like, this is really not worth the effort. And so I appreciate all of the patience from Steve and Demetrius and Mikal, who responded to my 84 emails and would send me information on a Sunday night. And along the way, though, what we did was we refined that roadmap because we didn't have the clear path forward before. We had kind of bits and pieces, but they were different because we wanted them to be full members of the team. They're not students, they are professionals. And we wanted also to implement the best practice of compensating them for their time. And so this was really like our pilot in a way of figuring out how do we do this process. And both of them explained they're familiar with research. And so they weren't completely new to the world of academic research. Our goal is to evolve to a point where we can do this with people whose expertise may not include previous experience with traditional academic research, because we acknowledge that their expertise and their experiences are so important to the development of our study designs, to the development of our engagement processes, to our recruitment, to the actual data collection, to the analysis, and then to the dissemination. We can't get there if we can't even get people in the door. And so part of my job has really been to think about how do we understand the process and make it at least acceptable that we're working our way through. And so I could look at that on my wall and be like, okay, we're moving, like it's taking time, because each of those steps involves multiple institutions, involves multiple systems, some of them related to the IRB, some of them related to establishing them as contractors. We had our contracting team at UH had to be involved. We also had IT involved. We had my own team involved. And so just recognizing upfront how much time that's going to take. I mean, I think it probably took us a solid 3 months to get through the whole process. And we've learned some really important lessons along the way that will allow us to condense that, I think, going forward. But we also acknowledge that there's, city training, for anybody who's ever done city training, like that's a heavy lift. And I really appreciate that we have the opportunity to use also the certification process, which is a different avenue to do human subject research, that sort of human subject research training. And it's a little bit more accessible. And so it's another door to come in, but I think that we've got to be really thoughtful about how we make that appealing to people, and we explain it in a way that is not laced with jargon. I think about, probably half of what I just said, I catch myself because we're not using language that's common language. We're using like that sort of insular and like, if you're not already in the loop, you're like, this isn't for me. And so we're trying really hard to identify those things along the way so that Demetrius and Mikal can help us think about how we take it to the next level. And by that, I mean, making sure that our community researchers on the next project maybe don't bring their previous experience with research in the door, and we help create space and so that they can share in as much of the research study as a whole as possible.
And Becca, we have a comment in the chat about payment. Payment processes are so challenging and inequitable. Our institutions could do a much better job of institutionalizing community research roles and positions within the university. Could you share a little bit about best practices for planning for community researcher compensation?
Oh, I feel like, I don't know who asked that. I haven't looked at the chat, but that's like I planted that one. I love it. Thank you. So we are in the process, and I will say this is like every process, it's, you know, there's like the aspirational timeline and there's the real timeline. It's going to take a while, but we are in the process of creating a PRN position at UH that will be a community researcher. And so that will allow us to bring people in through the front door instead of kind of like the side door. Like right now we got Mikkel and Demetrius and Steve research credentialed as contractors, but we would love to have people as like, you are a UH employee, you are PRN, you are, we will develop a scope of work together for your specific projects that you work on. We will compensate you for your time, and we will think about how to identify research projects that are interesting to you, that will be willing to bring you fully on board onto the research team. So I feel like it's going to take us a while to get there as an institution, but if we can use the roadmap we've created and we can like formalize these pathways and we can show both young and experienced researchers in a variety of different roles throughout our system, this is possible. And this is important. I mean, there's a lot of times where I feel like we give lip service to the more diverse research teams. And when we think about that as academic diversity and lived experience diversity, we have to sort of think of that as a whole. So I'm really excited about that, but I think it's going to take us a little while to get there. And it's partnership with study teams like this one that will help us kind of tease out the nuances of really making that happen. And honestly, putting some positive peer pressure on our own systems. I know that Metro has more experience in this lane and we're learning from them. And so for us to be able as institutions to work together and talk about those best practices and kind of compare and say, what are you paying your researchers? And we think about what we pay for doctors, we think about what we pay for social workers within our own systems. And we need to make sure that we're not, you know, we're acknowledging the value of the lived experience of people in the community who can help us better understand the health outcomes and the things that we're really trying to design these studies for in the first place.
Wow, thank you.
And I can say that this grant for this project is a very small grant. So I know that I have Mikkel and Demetrius have given a lot more than they've been. I mean, we try to compensate them for what they have done, but I know that we have not compensated them for everything they've done by any means. And I'm just want to say how grateful they have been, like true partners in this. And I wish I could give them more money. I just, we don't have a big grant for this, but just again, there was no sort of standard bar for this. We pay them based on the interviews that they do. But just to sort of let people know that's where we are with this. And again, I know it's like, I wish they have been such a, like the critical linchpin of this study. So I don't want to pretend that we are compensating them fairly for what they're doing.
It's all on your tab, Ava.
How did you mitigate for potential differences in power and influence?
I hope, I'm a new researcher, so hopefully I take as much learning from Becca and Steve and Mikkel and Demetrius, I hope trying to be very collaborative, and we have like designing the questions for the dads, really work together as a team on making sure we sort of had some baseline questions, but really taking input from everybody. I hope really working collaboratively and sort of taking whatever feedback that each member brings. And again, everybody brings their own perspective to this. And I hopefully, Demetrius and Mikkel, you can be very honest and say your experience, and Steve. But I think maybe as a new researcher, I will take any advice people can give me. And so I hope that the team has felt that way, that we are collaborative.
I think what would help in this particular matter and is that we kind of all already had a feel for each other and knew each other. So that helped. But aside from that, it's very like, open, because we understand like professionally who we all are in our different dynamics. But you know, when we meet, or every time that we meet or we come up with these ideas, share emails, it's like I know I can call out Dr. Johnson Ava, but she also fostered that environment. And of course, I've worked with her before, and I've worked with Steve. And so it's a comfortable environment, but they both foster it too. So being so open, I know Ava said she's really new with it, but being very open to what you don't know or understand was very helpful, and leaning on the team. I know it's not within your nature to be like a know-it-all, but yeah, it's very comforting to know like the leader of the team, because you still are spearheading it, is open to suggestions, opinions. And you know, then we have Becca, who's doing the behind the scenes things, and I'm scrambling to get emails, but that open communication and constant of what we think, how this looks, was very good. So it's the power dynamic, or however it's phrased, was never something that I felt seen or anything. It's just like we're all colleagues working for this goal, and we're just a team. And we never used titles either, so it was great.
Right.
I
Yeah,
just
Mike.
wanted to add that Becca's like complicated chart of like the processes to get us onboarded, like the chart looks like kind of wacky, but like going through that experiences wasn't that bad. And maybe because I work in conjunction with a program that's funded by the state of Ohio. So, you know, we work with government entities. And so like, you know, bureaucracy is just something that we're used to, but I don't really recall looking back on it, like getting the onboarding on this and it being like, oh my gosh, another thing. It was just like, that's the red tape. That's a bureaucratic system, and you know, we just got to do it. So it was not that bad.
Not bad at all, and everything was thoroughly explained.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that. I mean, this worked because Ava and Becca are just, you know, wonderful people that we had good personal relationships with. Neither of them brought any power or influence to the system. And as Mikal and I work on the same project with the state, and you know, I'm a checkbox, you know, and you know when they're checking the box, and there's no sense of that with Ava and Becca, and it just, that makes all the difference.
I think one more thing that I would say makes a difference is that there's passion. Everybody feels very passionate about this project that's working on this team. Like nobody's take this job because they just wanted a paycheck. Like everybody feels really, really committed, or at least I get the sense everybody feels very, very committed to this, and that's why they're, you know, they're not doing it for the money. So it's, so again, I do think that has made it a really collaborative team, because we all are trying to figure out the best way, the best outcome for this project, and where this can go. So that I think has really helped the dynamics of this team, because it's not a job. It's like, we feel passionate about it.
And something, just my last point about the power, if you will, it's good that people like, you know, Steve and Ava hold a certain amount of power, if you will, like in whether it's the state or the healthcare system, but using essentially, I'll say, privilege, for lack of a better term, and you know, influence to take a project like this and then use that to kind of magnify it is a good use of kind of like a power dynamic, if you will. Bring light to something using your resources, your connections, you both sit on various things, including Mikal too. You guys are very, very big people in your own right. So using that influence on a project like this is amazing, but also there is no ego within inside of it.
That's excellent. Thank you, Demetrius. And everyone touched on this in a different way, kind of in the middle of the talk, but how can we broaden what the definition of a researcher is?
I'll take a first stab and then pass the baton to the next person. I think the first step, honestly, is to acknowledge the limitations that we've created ourselves, and be really sort of like brutally honest about what are the hurdles that we require people to clear to be part of research. And that includes the way that we talk about research. It includes the logistical steps to become a researcher. And some of that, I think, requires people who are probably not researchers to be the experts and say, this is how this comes across, or this is how it feels to go through this. So I'm looking, I mean, again, knowing Demetrius and Michaela and Steve have experience with research before, but we're going to have a conversation about just in the context of this project so that we can start to tease that apart, and then we need to do it again with people who have less experience and sort of continue to refine and treat that as a really objective project in and of itself, because otherwise we're just in an echo chamber patting ourselves on the back for making this easier or better, when in reality we're not getting like honest feedback. So the team that I work with every day is an evaluation team, and we want to know the brutal truth. And the only way to get to that is to make sure that you're asking the right questions. So I think it starts there.
I think an education component to the community members about like why is this research important and why this has value, I think is an important step in that too. So getting messages out into the community about like, not only like getting them to become community researchers, but like why, what's the value in this, and what are the outcomes, and what difference is this going to make, and and creating messages or that that speak to that.
I guess I would add to that when folks from an institution like UH go out to the community to look for researchers, they need to have that attitude that they value them as experts and that people that will improve their research. And Becca and Ava just clearly have that, but it's important that others look to them as role models and have that as well.
Absolutely. Any other comments, Dr. Johnson?
I mean, they have been a valuable piece of the team. And I think, really, when I started this project, I was looking through the medical school, different ways. But again, people that have lived this experience, when you're trying to get connected to dads that often are Medicaid or no insurance at all, we've had trouble, I think, like Sheena said, actually finding those dads that actually don't have connection to the health system. But again, somebody who has lived that experience might be able to help us figure out how do we reach those men better, because we're not, even though we're very intentional with it, we haven't been able to reach those men as best as we'd like to. And again, that is at a perspective that really we probably need to think more about how we're going to focus on. And again, having somebody who lived that experience would be able to be a valuable piece to add to us.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? We will send out a link to certification that was referenced with our follow-up email and survey.
I'll pitch for the certification, because I saw there was a note in the chat about city training, which is really time consuming and a bit daunting. I always joke that nobody's going to get research credentialed by accident, the way that we've designed our system. And so the certification is abbreviated both in time and in content, and acknowledging that the whole reason we do city training is really to make sure we're protecting the people that we're welcoming into the study as participants, but that we want to ensure that we're not creating such high barriers to be a part of the study team. So CASE does have the certification process that was developed, and there's other institutions that use it as well. I honestly have to defer to Demetrius and Mikhail, who went through it this time. If you could just give us a little bit of insight about like the time frame. I want to say it was like 2 hours is what I've heard, but I don't know. I'm gonna punt to you. We'd love to hear a little bit about that, because I know probably a lot of folks on this call are more familiar with what city entails, which is kind of daunting.
I don't remember exactly how long it was, but I remember being like, oh, that's it. Like, that was my first reaction when it was done. It's like, oh, that's it. That wasn't so bad. So I would say an hour, maybe hour and a half.
Yeah, I don't remember either, but I don't remember it being, like Mikhail said, it's draining, overbearing. It probably didn't take that long at all. I would remember if I had to spend hours on it.
I do want to say though that, I mean, Demetrius and Mikhail have done everything they've been asked to do with all this credentialing certification, but Becca has been in the background, like running frantically on her bike to get all this done. And so as much as Demetrius and Mikhail had wonderful to have a smooth experience, it's because Becca was back there like lining everything up and,
That's
having
right.
this fill this paper out. Okay, do this. And without her, we wouldn't have even known to fill the paper out. So so anybody who's thinking about engaging community researchers, Becca would be a wonderful resource. And I know we're trying to build something to, like, her team is to actually have a template for how you would use this in the region. But in the meantime, she's somebody who could, walk you through that, very complicated string diagram about how this happens. And again, it was a lot, it was months and months of work to get that together. And it was after we finished one thing, I was like, oh, here's one extra thing you need to do. And here's one extra thing you need to do. So even when you thought you were done, you were never done. So I think we're done now, but maybe not.
Yeah, it was the gift that kept on giving for quite a while there. But I think the takeaway for me, honestly, and I appreciate that, I'm glad that, like, that tells me a lot when everybody's like, well, it wasn't too traumatic, like, oh, good. Because we don't want to scare people away either. We don't want anybody to be like, I want nothing to do that ever again. But it's important to have somebody. Like, if I was constantly handing this off to somebody else, then there's no way, because the process isn't formalized enough, there's no way to really keep track of it and keep on top of it. And so it requires institutional investment. We have to be able to commit resources of time of people who can either know the answer or they know how to figure it out. And honestly, that's what takes a lot of the time, at least at the outset. And so our hope is that shifting from red tape to more of a green tape model is that we are streamlining, we are making processes more clear, so that somebody else can pick it up and do it in a month and a half instead of 3 months, or kind of knows, now we have a better understanding of where those different, like, branching points are and what could send you off into the woods, and then who to call, because sometimes that's the easiest thing, is just to call and say, hey, this request is coming in. I know it looks a little bit different, it's out of policy, but here's why. And answering those questions up front, I find, really limits the questions that they'll then come up with as you start to work through the answers to their questions, if that makes sense. So, and then we don't end up off in the woods with like a 2-week detour. So I think there's a lot to be said for just somebody owning that process, even though it's not nearly as interesting or as exciting as the research study itself. But the study can't happen without getting everybody through that. So I like the back office role, and I like fixing processes. So it's a good fit for me, and working with a team like this who's really passionate about what we're learning and how it's going to then be applied in the clinical setting and in our own community, I think it makes it really exciting. So we're making progress.
And I would say also make sure building funding into this credentialing piece for your community researchers is an important thing that we didn't really think through initially, because we didn't realize how much time it was going to take to get our community researchers on board. So I appreciate them. I was every time Becca had to send them a new email, I was like, they might quit today. Like, they made time, like, they're just not going to do this anymore, because it was like, I felt like so many extra things, not just what it was the process, but so having some timeline sort of built in for them, but also compensation built in for the back and forth emails and, you know, all the forms they need to send back in, would be just a little piece of a tip I would give anybody who's going to go on this pathway.
Yeah, I'd also say that a personality trait that you need to look for is people that don't believe there's any barrier cannot be overcome. We won't yield to any barrier. And Becca clearly had that throughout. And, you know, by the third time I had to prove that I had had a flu shot, you know, it just became kind of like, oh my gosh, here we go again, you know, and I'm calling people and but you have to have everybody involved has to believe that there's no barrier that can't be overcome.
I love that. Love all the smiles. I mean, we can definitely feel your positive energy and team dynamics, and can only hope to aspire to create the same things as we provide these resources to our research community. So thank you so much, Demetrius, Macau, Steve, Becca, and Dr. Johnson. We really appreciate your time and insights, and we'll definitely
Thank
have
you.
for a workshop. What is next? We will be talking about equity and engagement again, but this time we'll be focusing on building relationships with community health workers to advance research. That's April 4th from noon to 1, also on Zoom. And since you're registered for the series, you'll receive a reminder email once we get closer to that date. What can you do today? You can schedule a READI consultation at spark.case.edu. You can sign up to attend future programming and join our listserv, and review CTSC DEIA resources. We're going to give you a couple of minutes for virtual commute time. It's really important to engage in meaningful activity that will help you commute back to yourself. That's a term coined by Dr. Jennifer A. King. She'll be facilitating our engaged break during our unmeeting on Thursday, March 16th. We hope that you're registered for that. And thank you so much for joining us. Let's connect, and we hope to see you again at a future program. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.